Welcome to the Opportunity Podcast, where entrepreneurs come to learn from real buyers, sellers, and industry experts on the lesser-known growth opportunities to build their online business empires. We'll uncover tactics veteran online business entrepreneurs have used to build, buy, flip, and sell their way towards personal wealth. Sit back, grab a coffee, and get ready to uncover hidden growth secrets. The Opportunity Podcast starts now.
Welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast, your go-to resource for hidden growth opportunities throughout online business. We're your hosts. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Sarah.
And thanks for joining us for our latest episode.
Yeah, so today we'll be speaking with Kevin Bastoul. He is a Silicon Valley native and a member of our vetting team. He'll be discussing the growth of SaaS on our marketplace and in the industry as a whole.
Yeah, that's right, Sarah. I'm really also excited to talk to Kevin about why the SaaS business model is so desirable, also some of the key growth opportunities this business model offers, and what it was like for Kevin growing up in Silicon Valley, surrounded by so many tech startups right at the start of his digital career.
Yeah, so we don't want to give away too much just yet. So let's dive into the interview and see what Kevin has to share. And then at the end of the episode, we'll go over some of the best listings on the Empire Flippers marketplace that highlight the growth opportunities we've learned about today. Thanks for joining us again today for the Opportunity Podcast. Today we have one of our own, Kevin Bastoul. He is a vetting advisor, and he's been with us for about 1 year. For those who don't know anything about vetting, our vetting department is super crucial to what we do at Empire Flippers. They're the ones actually going through and making sure that all businesses that want to sell in our marketplace are fully examined, they are profitable, and they're going to be great businesses to acquire. So the reason that we brought Kevin on today is that he's got this really interesting background. He comes from basically growing up around Silicon Valley, deep into tech, and then he sort of connected that all to a new position at Empire Flippers. So without spoiling much on it, Kevin, I just want to say thanks for coming on. Thanks for giving us a little bit of your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Yeah. Okay, so you grew up around Silicon Valley, something that I just learned before this call. So can you paint a picture of that for me? What was that like kind of growing up so close to the tech epicenter, and how did that actually draw you into a career in tech?
Yeah, well, I guess I never really knew that I was in a tech epicenter growing up. I just kind of took it for granted. But I grew up in Mountain View, went to Mountain View High School, so very close to Google's headquarters. Microsoft has an office there, HP has offices there. So was always kind of surrounded by these big tech companies. My parents were in tech, both working at big tech businesses around the area. All my friends' parents were pretty much in tech. So it was a pretty common, there was a lot of just tech around me. And growing up, I guess I didn't really get a sense of that until later in life when I started to do some traveling, and I really understood how unique that was to have so many huge tech companies centered in one area, just kind of around where I was growing up, and would drive by them on my way to school or way to friends' houses and whatnot. So that was kind of raised in that Silicon Valley environment. And then after school, where I went to school for computer engineering and computer science, I came back to San Francisco and joined a large SaaS company called Veeva Systems that makes software for medical companies and pharmaceutical companies. And I worked as a software performance engineer at Veeva for 2 years after school. So that gave me my first kind of picture into the actual tech scene from a more, career perspective, and learned a lot there. And then after Veeva, I came to Empire Flippers, which is where I currently work as a vetting advisor.
Awesome. It's really cool to hear your perspective because it's, I guess, coming from Virginia. I only have notions of maybe what Silicon Valley is like, maybe based off the TV show, or just like a very much an outsider perspective. And every time I think about it, I always think of I think of excitement. I think of everything being very futuristic. And I don't know, I kind of imagine a lot of cool people. I don't know if that's just an outsider perspective, but
Yeah.
could you tell me a little bit more about like that environment? Is it as exciting as I'm kind of making out to be? Did it really feel like you were in a place where basically the future was unfolding right in front of you?
Yeah, I guess like I never thought of it like that when I was growing up. And even, went off to college and came back, I never really like understood that. But actually, since I've joined Empire Flippers and I've done a ton of traveling around the world since then, I've kind of gained a better perspective of the differences between, growing up in South Bay Area and San Francisco versus other places in the world. And definitely some of the things I've noticed is just how people in the Silicon Valley seem to be very optimistic about the future. They seem genuinely like very intellectually curious, a little bit quirky, I would say. Sometimes there's a lot of like kind of interesting people that are into like really interesting hobbies, read interesting books, or always like suggesting new podcasts. So there is definitely like a excited, optimistic, kind of forward-looking attitude in Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of optimism around the future. Well, I feel like when I go to other areas around the world, sometimes it's not quite as, forward-looking or optimistic, or it just feels like maybe what Silicon Valley felt like maybe 10 or 15 years ago. So it's almost like living a little bit ahead of the rest of the world. Yeah, that's how kind of my perspective on it has changed as I've traveled more. But it definitely is an exciting place. And I mean, right now I'm back at home in Los Altos, and I'm very happy to be home and just, surrounded by people in this area that have really interesting conversations about tech, and the antitrust hearings just happened. So all my friends and I have been talking about that. And it's really interesting to be surrounded by people who are into that kind of stuff and have a good attitude on it.
Yeah. I want to ask because it's like, I mean, it's such an interesting environment, it's such a dynamic environment. So many people fight so hard to get into that scene and to make it in Silicon Valley, which kind of leads me to ask, you'd been in there for a couple of years. You've been working at this big SaaS company. You seem like basically you're doing the thing that you're meant to do, kind of growing up in and around it your whole life. But why did you transition out of that and find your way to like online business and Empire Flippers?
Yeah, well, so at the time I was working as a performance engineer. So I was doing a lot of, testing of our software, building test suites, kind of optimizing some of the hardware and software. And yeah, I learned a ton in the role, but I was really looking to, early in my career, expand my horizons a bit more and learn more about business. I was interested a lot in entrepreneurship growing up, and that was something that was probably a result of growing up in Silicon Valley, where there's so much glorification of startups and entrepreneurs. So kind of in my free time, I was listening to podcasts, working on some side projects. And through listening to podcasts like the Tropical MBA or Empire Flippers podcasts, I was kind of turned on to this scene of online business where it seemed like people were doing really cool things while traveling the world and making significant money, which was super exciting to me. And it's something at that point in my career that I really wanted to experience. And it did seem like Empire Flippers was a place where people that were really doing that for real, making real money and starting really legitimate online businesses were congregating, versus I felt like in a lot of the other resources and YouTube videos and communities I was looking at, there was a lot of kind of more spammy stuff in the online business world. And it seemed like Empire Flippers was a place where really legitimate businesses were going. And I really wanted to be a part of that and learn a lot and eventually start my own online business at some point. So when I saw a job opening at Empire Flippers, I thought that that would be a really great opportunity to learn a bunch, expand my horizons. So jumped over to Empire Flippers. Now been working as a vetting advisor here. And I mean, it's awesome because I just get to pretty much daily deep into the financials of online businesses, the growth strategies, the marketing and sales strategies they've used, get on the phone with the founders of these businesses and ask them pretty much any questions that I want, or figure out, what are the prospects of their business or what are they interested in and focusing on. So it's a really exciting place to learn and kind of be at the heart of the online business world. And that was at the time what I was really craving. And I feel like a lot of the tech and the background I had has complemented me at Empire Flippers and helped me understand like the internet environment better. But this is just kind of a new area that I was wanting to learn a lot about.
Yeah, Kevin, I completely agree with you on that. Coming from a similar area, I grew up just south of you from Mountain View in Los Angeles. So kind of the same state, kind of same realm. And same with Sarah. I had always heard all about the excitement and all of this great things going on in Silicon Valley. And also, considered taking up a boot camp for coding in San Francisco and went through that whole process of researching that information. But what had drove me initially when I first learned about online business through our Digital Journey podcast was the opportunity to become location independent. So can you tell us a little bit about where you first got that start in becoming location independent, working solely from your laptop?
Yeah, well, I did quite a bit of traveling with my family growing up. And then after college, I actually went to USC in Los Angeles. So spent some time down in LA. Also really like it down there. But after college, I did some traveling with a friend. We went all over Southeast Asia and Japan and really got a bit of a travel bug from that. So I think maybe when I was working at Viva for 2 years and didn't have too much vacation, I was kind of craving a little bit more of that location independent lifestyle. But up to that point, I hadn't made money exclusively off my laptop in a location independent way. So Empire Flippers was that step for me into the location independent world and what has led to that now. Although currently with coronavirus, it's not too easy to be traveling the world.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. It has become a lot more difficult, that's for sure, switching between countries, and hopefully that'll turn around over time. But initially, so what was it that excited you about getting into the world of working with Empire Flippers? And were you able to build up some relationships that you're still, able to connect with today?
Relationships at Empire Flippers or back in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I guess more so going in with Empire Flippers. You said you noticed a lot of other peers and other mentors or maybe people that motivated you to get into running your own online business and getting into that space. But at the same time, was there some connections that you've made now since getting into working with Empire Flippers that you possibly wouldn't even have that opportunity had you stayed back in Silicon Valley?
Yeah, well, definitely. I think that majority of the people that work in Empire Flippers are, like entrepreneurial in nature, love traveling the world. They've built up, we've all kind of built up a pretty good understanding of the online business world. So these are all connections that I have now. I've made a lot of close friends at Empire Flippers that I'm super excited to have. And no matter where I go in my career moving forward, I know that I'm going to be connected to very forward-thinking, entrepreneurial people who have a good understanding of online business. I'm sure some people are going to go on to start online businesses. Some people are going to grow really long-term in Empire Flippers and hopefully become like a really massive marketplace. So I think those are excellent connections that I'm building. And I definitely would not have been a part of that. I do think with Silicon Valley is very forward looking and very kind of living in the future, but Empire Flippers really is a place that I feel is kind of in the future in a way, and people in Silicon Valley really aren't. I do think there's a little bit more of a traditional, like building big businesses, on-premise businesses, getting venture-backed funding. So there's a little bit of like that route that's kind of glorified in Silicon Valley. And I think that Empire Flippers is tapping into kind of a new trend of really like fully location independent, a lot of bootstrapped businesses, a lot of businesses focused on very niche markets. And I think that is going to be a growing trend in the future. So I'm excited to be a part of that at Empire Flippers and connecting with people that understand that trend.
I like what you just said there, because we just got off another call with Alex Champagne, the director of sales, and we were speaking about private equity and how like traditional private equity, you'd say is normally like sort of sleepy, slow moving to sort of pivot and go after new opportunities. Of course, unless you're smaller private equity, sort of unorthodox PE, now you're coming to our marketplace and going after opportunities. I think it's interesting because basically what you're saying is like Empire Flippers and online business, it feels more futuristic than Silicon Valley, because Silicon Valley was the future, but it's almost like they're roped into their own, I guess, their own path that they laid out, right? So it's like they know what funding they're going to go after. They kind of know what opportunities they're going to go after. Now it's almost been solidified where they might not be as fast moving as something like online business where the rules haven't really been set out or I guess laid out, right?
Yeah, the other thing is just like as people get more and more online and more things become just fully digital, it's almost like the location, like a geographical location isn't as important anymore. So Silicon Valley has always been a great place because it's a ton of brilliant people living in one place, kind of forming a community and sharing similar values and ways of doing things. But as more things become remote and digital, it almost is like a geographical location becomes less important. And it seems like Empire Flippers is really tapping into that trend where just by nature of being a geographical location, Silicon Valley can't, tap into that location independence in the same way.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. Actually, just getting stuck on the word trend right there, it is sort of tied into my next question. As you know, I guess Silicon Valley in a way feels trendy for a while, but one of the biggest trends, I guess, is SaaS. And I know SaaS in particular for our marketplace really feels like it's hot and trending. I feel like I see more and more people, more communities popping up of people trying to basically get on a SaaS model for their businesses. So I'm wondering from your perspective, someone who's worked in SaaS and is now applying that to our marketplace, what's your take on why SaaS is hot and trending, and just why are people flocking to this monetization in particular?
It's a great business model from both the consumer perspective and the business owner or vendor perspective. So on the consumer side, compared to previous software products where you had to do a large install, probably pay for a large upfront license, and then maybe update once a year or longer. It's kind of a clunky process. But now with SaaS products, from a consumer perspective, if you see a solution you like, generally there's free trials. You can just subscribe and have access to a software right out of the box without downloading anything that's being maintained by professionals. The hosting is maintained by professionals. Bug fixes are going in constantly. Feature updates are always being pushed. So it just works. It's easier from the consumer perspective. On top of that, it is generally a little bit cheaper from the consumer perspective too, because there's generally different subscription tiers. You can pick the tier that fits your needs. And if your needs change in the future, you just change your subscription tier and your features will change. So very little friction there. And if you want to cancel, you can just stop your subscription. So you really pay for it as you need it basis. And then let's say you're a business that's using a SaaS product and your business grows, it's really easy to scale the features and the number of accounts you have on a SaaS product just by raising your subscription tier. So, from a consumer perspective, it's just a lot more frictionless and it just kind of works. From a vendor perspective, it's also really great because, for one, if you're charging subscription and you keep your churn, or like how many users you retain each month, you keep people from canceling their subscription. If you're charging on a subscription basis, then you have a very regular and predictable stream of income, which is very nice from a business owner perspective. And then on top of that, it's a really scalable monetization. So there is a decent amount of upfront costs in building a SaaS product, but once you have it built, you can essentially deploy that product to hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of users without making significant changes to the product. Like the fixed costs and the cost of goods sold of your product don't scale proportionally to the number of users you have. So you're really able to just grow your product to a massive audience without too much, per user work, which is really nice if you're trying to build a very profitable product. And because of that, the way that the COGS don't scale proportionally with the users, you can get really good margins as you gain more and more users. So there's really good economics for the vendors of a SaaS product. On top of that, I think one of the reasons that it's becoming very trendy right now is just that there are so many tools and resources that have become available that make it really relatively easy compared to how it used to be to build a SaaS product. So, there's like development frameworks like Ruby on Rails where you can develop an MVP of a product in a weekend. And there's hosting like AWS that lets you spin up a development environment in an hour, just begin coding. And there's all these frameworks and tools. There's Stripe payment processor that you can just integrate and begin accepting payments. And then there's tons of learning resources now. So many people have built SaaS and put out open source learning resources, coding boot camps, like Brandon was talking about, Udemy courses to learn how to code, follow, various developers on Twitter. You can see what they're working on, what their resources they think are good. There's a lot of, I know I just covered a lot of ground there, but there's a lot of factors that are at play that are, increasing consumer demand. It's very good from an economic standpoint for vendors. And then the tools and the resources have just gotten so good that it's really possible for someone just sitting in their bedroom to build a SaaS product. Yeah, I know that was quite a bit of information there, but there's a lot going on, I think, behind that trend.
Yeah, no, definitely. And one thing I did take away from what you had mentioned was the scalability with SaaS is unlocked potential for, when you compare to like a monetization, like let's say, for example, FBA, if you had seen 1,000% growth within a quarter, you might have some issues with either your storage costs or not running out of inventory, and then maybe even ultimately going bankrupt with the business. Whereas with SaaS, as you had mentioned, the cost of goods and your margins are kept lower per user, you can scale 1,000% with a SaaS business and not have a huge hit to any additional income that you would need to support that growth in such a short amount of time.
Definitely. Like a benefit that SaaS has that we're starting to see recently is versus like more of an e-commerce or some of their monetizations is that when things like in an environment like this where everything has gone remote, there's maybe been some, logistic issues, having a fully digital business like SaaS is very resilient and it really lends itself well to prospering in tough times. So that's another thing that I would note.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that as well. And for our listeners that are maybe just getting started and researching and figuring out how these software as a service businesses and business models work in the world of the online space, what would you say maybe someone who's trying to get started in SaaS, or maybe they're trying to get their feet wet, they wanted to try out an online business acquisition, but how do you feel that people can get their start in this industry if they might not have a background such as yourself in tech or Silicon Valley?
Yeah, well, there's a couple of ways that you could go about it, but there's a ton of resources. So, if you want to learn to code and build the product yourself, there are great courses on Udemy. You can take a software development boot camp like we were talking about, essentially get to the point where you can deploy a full stack web application in a couple of months if you really dedicate yourself. Then there's also good resources for hiring developers. So there's Upwork is the one that comes to mind. If you have a really good idea and you have kind of an idea of how you can convey that to a developer, then they can build the product for you. And then there's lots of communities where various entrepreneurs, software entrepreneurs congregate and share advice. One of the ones that I really like is called Indie Hackers. It's just a ton of people building SaaS products together and talking about, different tools they're using, different resources, their financials. So that's a good place where you can go and learn a lot about how to build a SaaS. Good podcasts, good blogs. Startups for the Rest of Us is a good podcast. Indie Hackers, Empire Flippers blog is starting to have more SaaS related information on it. And that's kind of pulling from what we're seeing on our marketplace. So it's really up to date, good data that we're pulling from. There's a book that I recently read called Start Small, Stay Small, A Developer's Guide to Building a Startup, which I thought was excellent. It's like a very practical guide to bootstrapping a small startup. You really just need to Google around. I think that the resources are so abundant now. There's ways you can learn to code. There's opportunities for outsourcing code. It's really just a matter of having the drive to seek out the information you need, but it's all out there and most of it is free. So I think if you want to get in on it, the opportunity is there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you on that. And on the subject of being able to outsource programmers or people that are from Upwork or other sources to outsource some work, it's also worth noting that someone that might not have a background in coding or maybe is not a designer or a programmer, they could still come in to our marketplace, find a great opportunity with a SaaS business and scale it to these levels that we're talking about, 1,000% or more, without having that type of background. And because they have so many resources available online today, they can still grow these types of monetizations without having a background in programming or tech. And then if you could also, Kevin, on that subject, if you could also paint a picture of what does the world of SaaS kind of look like right now in our marketplace? What are some of the typical deal sizes or maybe some of the typical niches or type of services that you're seeing come onto our marketplace?
Yeah, so, there's quite a rise in these bootstrap startups that really focus on a narrow niche. And I think the reason for that is that, historically their SaaS products have been more, venture-backed startups or larger businesses that pick like a very broad market and then they build a product for it. Because there's all these very small niches that, maybe have a couple 10,000 people in that community or that niche, these larger SaaS companies or venture-backed startups don't really focus on them because the total addressable market isn't big enough. The return on investment for them wouldn't be big enough. So it leaves the opportunity open for smaller, what we would call like a micro SaaS, to really come in and create a very specific problem for that community. Primarily, we see these micro SaaS companies, we see quite a few in like the under $1 million range, and we're starting to get into the few $1 million range valuation for these micro SaaS businesses. And they generally take like a very specific niche and create a solution for it and then market very targeted to that community. One that comes to mind recently is just focusing on like fantasy sport analytics tools. So if you're into fantasy sports, analyzing the players, trying to build the best roster. So that would be an example of a small niche, very specific problem that a community faces and just building a very targeted solution to that and kind of taking that market. But it's big enough that for a single founder or a very small team of developers, you can generate a really solid income and eventually a really good exit just from a kind of a more niche down market.
Yeah, no, completely agree with you on that. Also, something I noticed, just a recent SaaS case study that I had written about a group of 5 investors. They had started up a SaaS business that was based on managing prospects and leads for other lead generation services. So finding the problem, creating a solution through a software as a service. And they had literally spent, between the 4 of them, 1 or 2 of the main guys was managing the asset, but they were only spending about 1 hour, maybe 2 hours per week on the business. And that's a great opportunity for someone that's looking to maybe not have a full-time job, is wanting to get their feet wet with SaaS, and they're just looking for something that's a bit more passive, but does have some potential to scale and grow further as they continue on learning what other solutions they could add into the model or other subscription services they could add in to better serve their customers and their subscribers. So what do you personally feel that could be the greatest opportunity for SaaS business owners when compared to any other type of monetization that's currently on our marketplace?
Well, I mean, it kind of what I was just saying is that, if you can identify a narrow market and create a software solution that solves it very specifically, you can generate that recurring revenue that we were talking about. You can have the benefits of scalability. It can be very passive once you've built the product if you're not looking to really invest insanely in growth or marketing and whatnot. If you just want kind of a steady growth, stable income SaaS business. And then on top of that, probably one of the best aspects of SaaS for a business owner is that you get really good valuations for SaaS. All the benefits that we've talked about of SaaS, the reasons that buyers will pay much higher multiples for a SaaS business. So it's not uncommon that we see like on our marketplace, 40, 50, 60 plus X times monthly profit for a valuation, which is much higher than the other monetizations types. So if you can build a good SaaS business, you can get a really good valuation on that business, which is a great advantage of the monetization.
Yeah, that's excellent. I mean, you've basically started answering my next question in a way. I want to sort of step into the shoes of potential SaaS seller. Why would they consider selling right now? It definitely sounds like going after those insane multiples and obviously the demand. It sounds like a pretty good reason to sell. But, I don't think what we have covered here is maybe what advice you would give would-be SaaS sellers. What is it that they need to know, should know if they want to be selling their business right now?
So I would say, for selling on a marketplace, if you really want to have a smooth sales process and get a good valuation, I mean, one of the important things is obviously growth in both revenue and user base always looks good and will increase the multiple and will increase interest from buyers. But on top of that, if you can just track your metrics well, show things like make sure you know what your retention rate is, your monthly retention rate or your churn rate is, what your revenue growth is year on year, what the lifetime value of your customers are. If you can just have that data tracked somewhere, you're going to be ahead of most of the other people trying to sell their business. And it's going to make it a lot easier for your vetting advisor to understand your business, give it the valuation that it deserves, and will be that's exactly the kind of information that buyers are looking for and will help them understand if they want to buy your business. And I mean, ultimately, it will lead to a faster sale, probably a higher multiple. So if you can just keep your business organized, have your metrics tracked, growth is ideal, as much as you can have like systematized as possible. That's always helps with the migration of a business and is attractive to a buyer to know that, things are built into processes that have like standard operating procedures and will be easily transferred over to a buyer. That helps sell the business as well. So I would say those are a couple things to think about when you're preparing your business for sale.
Yeah, no, this is all good to note. And I don't know if this is something that you've run into in your conversation with SaaS sellers, but this kind of came up another SaaS buyer interview that we had, where I think sellers also need to be aware that not all buyers are going to be technical. Maybe perhaps this buyer that comes to the table, if you were the person that developed or you were the developer on the business, maybe not to expect that the buyer is going to come in with the same know-how. So you're almost going to have to prep them in the sale to say, okay, here's what you need to know. Here's everything I can pass over. Maybe here's a developer I've worked with or a framework that you can pass on to a developer. Not really sure if you've been talking to sellers that have or don't have that expectation, but that's definitely something that we found as well.
Yeah, definitely we see that. And we have seen that it helps if the seller has either an outsourced developer that's willing to continue with the business or someone that's willing to continue with the business understands the code base, because it definitely makes it easier from the buyer perspective and just more comfortable knowing that they have someone coming on board that will continue to understand the code base and be able to work on it, so that if any issues come up right off the bat, they're not thrown into the deep end of having to wade through this code base, and maybe they're not very technical, so they're trying to hire somebody but things are breaking. So it's definitely helpful, like you mentioned, to have an outsourced developer willing to come on board, or somebody who's maybe willing to even consult after the sale of the business on the technical aspects. And then as vetting advisors, we do try to, package it up and describe what are the technologies in this business? What do you need to know? Like, how much technical experience do you need to run the business? Is there a developer coming on board? So we try to make all that information very upfront and clear.
Excellent. Well, I guess while we're on the subject of, maybe buyers' expectations and what to look for, I wanted to invite you into the shoes of a SaaS buyer as well. Maybe even like pretend like you are them and use your past experience. But, if you were a SaaS buyer, what would you look for and why? And just maybe what advice would you give to SaaS buyers coming to buy from us?
Yeah. One thing you want to always pay attention to is what is their churn rate, or there's a couple different names for it, but like, what is the retention of their subscribers? Because the retention of the subscribers is a really good indication of how much value the customer is getting out of the product. So if on a monthly basis, 25% of customers are canceling their subscriptions, and maybe the business has a ton of marketing or paid advertising expenses, which are at the same time driving signups, you can think that maybe this business actually doesn't have a very valuable product. They're just, have a really strong marketing or sales funnel that's driving in new signups. But as soon as people realize that the product's not great, they're unsubscribing. So that would be an example of something that you'd probably want to watch out for, because the long-term potential of a business isn't great. On the flip side, if you see a business with monthly churn rate of, under 10%, maybe 5%, then you know that this product is a really solid product that customers are getting value out of. And that's the hard part of building a SaaS business, is building a good product that customers like. So if you find that super valuable because you can pick that up and then really focus on, driving the growth of the user base, and then really focusing on maybe the sales or marketing more, have, maybe the product is at a point where you can kind of step back from it and focus on other aspects of the business. I think that metric right there captures a lot. Then you also just want to pay attention to the trend of the business. Is it declining? Is it stable? Is it growing? If it's declining, you want to see, can you identify why it's declining? Hopefully the seller has told the vetting advisor why, and it's in the description, so you can identify that and really judge if you have the skills or experience or whatever you need to turn around that declining trend. And stable and growing, obviously great signs to look for in a purchase of a business. So yeah, I would say those are a couple things that you want to pay attention to when looking at a SaaS business.
Yeah, very solid points, Kevin. And, making sure that you're not only that doing your own due diligence as a buyer, making sure that this is worth the investment, you're weighing out the pros and cons on both the risks and the benefits on both sides. But it also brings up a good point in, making sure that as the buyer, you're spending some time doing your due diligence and making sure that it is worth an investment that's worth your time. And it also meets your business goals, which is the number one, should be at the forefront for most investors looking at these types of monetizations. So now, Kevin, what do you feel with the current status and what SaaS is becoming and seeing these high multiples and these businesses come onto our marketplace? But what are your future predictions for SaaS and an industry as a whole?
My prediction would just be that it continues to grow. And, the reason for that, I think, is that more and more people are getting comfortable with having, like subscription software solutions for very specific problems. I subscribe to multiple tools now. I have a workflow tool that I just signed up for earlier this week. And, it seems more commonplace for people to want very specific, well-made, tailored solutions to their problems. And SaaS is a very good way of addressing that. So I think that the consumer demand is growing. And then on top of that, the development tools and the resources to build a SaaS are just getting so much better every single year that, there's tools like no code now, which lets you essentially build applications without really coding abilities. Like it's more like you're writing English almost to build a software application. So, those tools are still kind of getting their start, but they're becoming more and more prevalent. And it's very possible that in the coming years, people are building really legitimate software applications using no code, which would dramatically expand the number of people that could get into the SaaS world and really be involved in building or purchasing and maintaining or growing SaaS businesses. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I definitely think it's growing. Software development community is expanding, so more people are going to be available to, program on software businesses or build their own software businesses. And then we're seeing right now there's kind of a shift from, like more brick and mortar style businesses or even like physical good businesses to more digital businesses. So as people migrate more into the digital world, I think that SaaS is it's a fully digital business, so it fits right into that trend.
Yeah, no, solid point. And, seeing these multiples obviously going up over time and seeing the value that potential investors are seeing in these SaaS business models offers great opportunity for those looking to potentially sell their SaaS business and get a great exit from their return, or even acquire a great SaaS business that they can scale and grow to its full potential. So that leads me into my next question for you, Kevin. Why do you feel that Empire Flippers Marketplace is great for both SaaS buyers and sellers?
Well, one thing I think that kind of sets us apart is that we have a number of technical people in our vetting team. So, two of our vetting advisors have very extensive software backgrounds. So that really helps us understand the businesses we're looking at. We've been improving our vetting process to have the profit and loss statement better represent, what financials buyers care about in a SaaS business and include some of those SaaS metrics that I was talking about, like churn rate and lifetime value. So we've really tailored our vetting process and the display of our SaaS businesses to be more in line with what buyers are interested in looking at with a SaaS business. While I feel that some of the other marketplaces seem to be treating SaaS businesses like any other e-commerce business or affiliate business, when really there is some unique aspects that buyers care about that we need to highlight with SaaS businesses. So I think that we're doing a good job of tailoring our process to the specifics of SaaS businesses. And then we have a pretty extensive engineering team within our company. So that kind of infuses a little bit more of a tech savvy culture. So we are kind of, I would say, on top of the trends and are better positioned to understand these businesses and display them well to buyers, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. It's a solid point that you've made as well. with our own marketplace and experience in the online space. And it's funny that you'd mentioned some of the extra steps that we're taking compared to some of the other brokers or maybe some of the other online business acquisition marketplaces you might see where they might give out some valuable information to someone that might go and copycat that business, or you might get a URL for a business that's on the marketplace and then all of a sudden someone's able to reverse engineer it and build the exact same thing. So my question is, what extra steps are we at Empire Flippers taking when it comes to brokering these types of deals and the safety involved with SaaS business acquisitions?
Yeah, well, we do a number of things. Generally, we get direct or guest access to their payment processor. So we generally get access to their metric tracking software. Oftentimes, SaaS businesses have metric tracking software like Baremetrics or ChartMogul or ProfitWell. So we get access to that. We can see really what their churn rate is, what their monthly recurring revenue is, their lifetime value. We also have seen so many businesses and SaaS businesses that we kind of know what expenses to expect. And when a buyer fills in their expenses, if we see things missing, we follow up on those. We dig in to see maybe why those expenses are missing or get them included if the seller just happened to forget that expense or whatever reason they had for not including those. We inquire about growth strategies, ensure that nothing shady was done to grow the business. And if it was, then we make sure to be transparent and convey that to buyers so they know that maybe there's some risk they used a PBN or some paid review services while growing the business. So we always try to identify those things. And we're constantly communicating and learning internally from each other. We have a very active communication within our vetting team. And whenever we see anything questionable or shady come up, we're asking each other questions. Have you seen this before? How would you handle this? So we're kind of building a collective expertise on these businesses and getting really good at identifying when things look off so that we make sure that only legitimate businesses get through the vetting process. And then we also have a migrations team that, has developed strategies for migrating smoothly each of the payment processors and the different platforms and tools that these businesses use so that you can really kind of be less stressed in the migrations process and ensure that the business is going to be smoothly transferred from one owner to the other while the money is held in escrow. So there's no worry about, not getting your payment. The migrations team helps resolves disagreements, and there's an inspection period to ensure that the business earns on par with the stated revenue. So there's a lot of steps in place to ensure that nothing that's going to be going to harm the buyer gets through our process.
Yeah, actually on that note, Kevin, you were backtracking a bit, talking about vetting and the sort of things that we look out for to make sure that, basically sketchy businesses aren't coming through. Yeah. Would you say that there's any type of SaaS business that doesn't qualify during the vetting process?
Yeah, well, we have minimum requirements that we check on. So I wouldn't say these are as much like sketchy requirements, but requirements to vet out sketchy businesses. But we do require that the businesses have, for one, a 12-month profit average that is at least $1,000 per month. We don't allow rapidly declining businesses because it poses too much risk to a buyer. And then we require that specifically for subscription businesses that no more than 50% of the revenue comes from 3 customers. This is something we've seen a couple times, and it just poses too much risk. Maybe the customer is the seller's uncle or something. So, we don't know. The risk of having 1 or 2 of those customers cancel and tank the revenue of the business is too risky for our marketplace. So that's another thing that we try to avoid. But at a basic level, those are some of our minimum requirements. Yeah, I think that's like the most minimum set. And then obviously when we're doing the vetting, we kind of can look and see if they've done really shady things. And if it looks like the business is too much of a risk or is going to tank in the near future, then we also wouldn't let that through. But that can be taken more on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I appreciate you giving me a picture of that. I'm sure that somebody is going to be listening to this and kind of hoping to either get into SaaS or maybe they have a SaaS and without really understanding the guidelines and what it is you're looking for, they just might not have any clue on if it's worth their time or should they be submitting to the marketplace. So appreciate it. That's pretty helpful. I'm kind of wrapping up here with a pretty vague and open-ended question. You've definitely shared a lot in the interview, so I'd feel bad making you repeat anything else, but just sort of like looking outward, looking forward, is there anything else you've noticed with SaaS lately that, our listeners could gain some value from?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have anything new to say, but just to emphasize that I do think that people are becoming much more interested in this monetization. And I'm back in the Silicon Valley now, so I'm kind of doing these social distance, fire pit meetups or just hanging out with friends, and we're just kind of chatting. And I know a lot of friends that have jobs in the Bay Area that are looking to get into online business, and they have technical skills, and I've kind of pointed them to our marketplace. They're checking it out. They're thinking it would be really cool to, make the jump to online business, but kind of skip that process of starting their own business. So I do see there's like this growing interest even from, a more traditional crowd in Silicon Valley for this online business world and getting into SaaS, purchasing a SaaS business. And I think that trend's only going to continue. So it is a really great time to build a SaaS business or be looking at SaaS businesses. And I think that's only going to continue to grow.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, it really does feel like now is a time that online business, it seems to be more of the future than maybe even some people realize or have anticipated. But, if you're thinking about getting into SaaS, go ahead and make it happen. It's getting easier than ever now, like you said. And, certainly if you're a SaaS seller, you're in a pretty great position to make amazing money off of selling your business. So, Kevin, I really appreciated having you on today. We've learned so much through the process, and you're making me really wish that I had a SaaS business of my own. Certainly don't, but that's okay. Yeah, I just want to say thanks again, and definitely looking forward to seeing more SaaS come through to our marketplace. And I'm sure you're going to have a lot of fun vetting those businesses.
Yeah, I will. Thanks so much for having me on. This was really fun.
Yeah, it was great having you on, Kevin. Thank you again. Hey everyone, as promised, now that we've wrapped up this episode and learned about the SaaS business model and how you can get in on this upward trending industry, we wanted to connect you with some of the best listings in the SaaS space that we offer on our marketplace and offer a great opportunity for those looking to get in on this business model for themselves. So first off, we have a listing 46538, which is a SaaS business in the business niche. What's really great about this business and offers huge potential for possible investors is that it has over 25,000 social media followers spread across Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So someone with a little bit of social media experience or marketing know-how can come in and really push this business to its full potential and maybe even scale some of the operations or the management of these profiles through utilizing maybe an established team of outsourced VAs or workers that they've already accumulated over the years. Another great opportunity that this business offers is that there's already a team in place. So if you don't happen to have a virtual team established or already in the works or process, you can go ahead and utilize the team that's already available to the, future buyer of this business. And this virtual team consists of a project manager, a developer, a salesperson, and a content manager. So really covering all the bases that you would need to scale this business to its full potential. Might not even have SaaS or programming know-how or experience. You could still come in, grow this business, and utilize this team of virtual assistants or programmers and content managers to really push this business to gain some great ROI potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, my business in particular makes me think of ROI potential. It's listing 47897. It's a SaaS application and affiliate business in the apparel and accessories niche. The business is a Shopify app that solves a problem for a popular online business model. This one is really great because I feel like it has well-established base to be building off of. It's got an email list of 20K, a Facebook account with 14K likes, a group with over 50,000 members, and two YouTube accounts, one with over 30,000 subscribers and another that's just beginning. And then really what's most important is it's already got 8,500 active installs and 59,000 lifetime installs for the app. So it's a huge deal. I think that they've tapped in to a real need in their community and they've built a powerful solution around it, which is really the best thing that you can go after for a SaaS business. There is a partner. There is actually a developer that's partnered with the business. He or she'd be willing to continue on with the new buyer. There's also another app-based kind of business sort of waiting as a growth potential opportunity. It's built on the WooCommerce platform. It's 90% complete. And there's a personalization widget that is 80% complete. Finishing these 2 items would be great growth opportunity for a buyer. So basically there's an almost finished project waiting to go should the buyer want to launch those things. So yeah, talk about ROI. I think there's a lot of really good things waiting for this business in particular. Other than that, I just want to close this up and say thanks again for everyone tuning in to another episode of the Opportunity Podcast. We hope you gained some valuable insight to the opportunities digital acquisitions offer. Click the link in the description or visit empireflippers.com/marketplace to learn more about these businesses or to see other listings that are currently live on the platform. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a comment and subscribe to this channel for more great content that will be released soon. Until next time, we're your host. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Brandon, and thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Opportunity Podcast.